Week 16 of the NFL season is officially in the books, so in today's video, I want to give my honest opinions and reactions to every single game. But if you guys do go on to enjoy the video, make sure you guys hit the like and subscribe button. Let's hop into it. And we are going to begin with the Denver Broncos versus the LA Chargers. This game was a pretty clean back and forth game in which the Denver Broncos felt like they were going to win this one in the first half until the Chargers started to put things together in the second half. This game had very little turnovers. There was, I think, an interception in this game, but nothing that really drastically changed the perspective of this game. Again, this game was very even, and honestly, I feel like if both these teams were to meet 10 times, I feel like both teams would win around 5 each. The difference really in this game was penalties for Denver, where they had 7 penalties for 61 yards, whereas the LA Chargers only had 2 penalties for 8 yards. I'm not saying that is the sole reason why the Broncos lost this game, but it definitely was at least a reason as to why it happened. In this game, though, we saw 2 AFC West opponents that have extremely bright futures. Obviously, both have very good young quarterbacks, so this is going to be a duel for the foreseeable future, and maybe one of these future years, one of these 2 teams will end up winning the division. For now, the LA Chargers get the better hand, and they are now potentially looking to make a nice little playoff run. Moving on to the Houston Texans versus the Kansas City Chiefs. The Kansas City Chiefs yet again win another game this season, this time in a bit more comfortable fashion. Obviously, they've had a lot of nail-biting type of games where they probably shouldn't have won, or maybe even games they got a little bit lucky. This wasn't necessarily one of those games. I thought the offense for Kansas City was really solid, especially in the first half. Was it perfect? No, but I don't really expect this offense to ever be perfect again. Mahomes was clean with the football, made plays with his legs, obviously was able to throw the ball quite well in this one. Xavier Worthy has continued to put together a nice little string of games as of late. The concerning thing for me about this Kansas City team is that they're winning these games, and obviously they've lost only to the Buffalo Bills, so they're obviously a great team. My concern for this team is just, can this offense get to another level in the postseason? We haven't quite seen it yet. In this game, it was better but not great. Whereas for the Houston side, it felt like the Houston Texans had a lot of momentum coming into this game. By the second quarter, things kind of were going their way, but things got pretty bad after the Tank Dell injury. Tank Dell gets injured, and it just felt like after that, they just couldn't regroup and they couldn't rally back into this game. It's an unfortunate injury, and I think it's going to be one that is probably going to hurt this Texans team, at least for this season, and even in future years if he has a hard time coming back from this injury. But yeah, it's just one of those games where Houston came out the gates looking pretty good. CJ Stroud was looking good. They got a couple nice runs from Mixon, and Tank Dell was getting really involved. And then things just kind of sputtered in the second half after the Tank Dell injury. So yeah, I'm worried about Houston. I don't think they're going to make a deep playoff run, but at least they have the division pretty locked up. Moving on to the AFC North clash between the Baltimore Ravens and the Pittsburgh Steelers. This was a massive game for both these teams because obviously both these teams are trying to fight to win their division. Pittsburgh got the better of Baltimore a few weeks ago, and this time the Baltimore Ravens kind of put a beatdown on them. Obviously, I wouldn't say it was necessarily a full-on beatdown, but the final score was 34-17, so it was a pretty clean win. There's a lot of different things you could take away. I do think that both these teams are really good teams that have a lot of things going for them. Obviously, the big thing for Pittsburgh is that they're just not really healthy right now. They got a bunch of guys banged up defensively, and George Pickens did not go in this one. And when you don't have a lot of those guys playing at their full level, it's really going to be difficult to match up with a team that has Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. So yeah, in this game, the Ravens just kind of relied on Lamar Jackson making big plays and Derrick Henry pushing some big runs. And once they got those things kind of going, the Steelers really didn't have a chance to match them offensively because they just don't have the personnel, especially when George Pickens isn't out there. It's, for me, the one reason that I just don't think Pittsburgh is a true championship contender, because I just don't know what this team has outside of George Pickens in the receiving corps. I do think that that is something they should look to address in the offseason, because they could really use a number 2 option or a legitimate threat outside of George Pickens. I mean, hell, their leading receiver in this game was Calvin Austin, so that kind of should tell you everything you need to know. For Baltimore, I think their offense is great. I think their defense is a little inconsistent right now, but if they can just get a solid defense in the playoffs, I think they can make a pretty deep playoff run and potentially make a Super Bowl, especially with how good the offense is, but the defense is going to have to step up in the big playoffs. Next up, let's talk about the New York Giants versus the Atlanta Falcons. Not a bunch to talk about here because the New York Giants they're tanking for probably Shedeur Sanders. They currently hold the number 1 pick, which we'll talk about how they got that here in a few games. New York Giants get the number 1 overall pick, and I'm sure that that's probably the best news that can come from today. Whereas for the Falcons side of things, you started Michael Penix Jr. this week, and I thought he played pretty well. He did have an interception, but it wasn't his fault. It was Kyle Pitts' fault. And again, I just thought he played a really solid game. Was he incredible? No, but I thought he played with good time, good precision, didn't force the ball, made some veteran-like plays here and there. I thought he had a really solid rookie performance, and a debut performance, I should say. The ground game got going. I thought the defense had a really good game. They had a couple touchdowns, as well as they just really made life difficult for Drew Lock all day long. So big shout out to the defense. Shout out to Michael Penix Jr. I will say the Buccaneers losing, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, and with the Falcons having a bit more momentum with Michael Penix Jr., I guess anything's kind of possible for this Falcons team moving forward. Next up, an NFC North matchup between the Detroit Lions and the Chicago Bears. Again, not a whole bunch to really talk about with this one. I feel like we all kind of saw this one coming. The Lions, even though they are banged up, just are a really well-coached and really talented team. Even if they don't have guys like Montgomery and all their defensive personnel, they just have so many different pieces that just make this team go. They're still a legit NFC threat, so not a lot to talk about from a Lions perspective. But from a Bears perspective, the defense has completely fallen apart. But the one positive is that Caleb Williams continues to look pretty good out there. Sure, he's not perfect, and yeah, he's making some mistakes, but I mean, it's kind of a one-man show offensively. They just don't have a consistent ground game. The offensive line isn't good. The play calling is hit and miss, and I feel like Caleb Williams is kind of making the most of the situation. So if you are a Bears fan, that is some reason to be a bit more optimistic about the rest of the season and moving forward. But yeah, get this guy a head coach, because the defense has fallen off a cliff since the firing of their head coach. Moving on to one of the bigger upsets of the day, where the Carolina Panthers upset the Arizona Cardinals in overtime. I did not see this one coming. I thought the Arizona Cardinals were going to take care of business as they continue to try to make a playoff push, but that did not happen. They lost to overtime, and a lot of things to take away from this game. Obviously, for Arizona, the big sort of takeaway is that they have to come out way better in the first quarter. They had a zero burger in the first quarter, whereas Carolina came out the gates and played pretty well. It took a little bit for Arizona to really get going, but once they got going, they had several opportunities to actually take a lead or tie the game up or make this game a lot more closer, and it just felt like every time that those opportunities came up, something kind of went opposite of what it should have went. Obviously, like some turnovers, some bad plays here and there, and yeah, it's just a little frustrating if you're a Cardinals fan, because Kyler Murray had an okay game, James Conner had a very productive game, and you know, Trey McBride couldn't get going. Again, Marvin Harrison Jr. just was non-existent out there. It's almost to the point now where I kind of wonder why Kyler's not even looking his way at this point, because he just has no production out there anymore. Obviously, a frustrating game for Arizona, because you at least wanted to give yourself a shot to potentially win the division or at least make the playoffs, but that isn't going to be the case. But I will say the positives here is that you took a big step forward from year 1 in Gannon to year 2 in Gannon, so I think year 3 should be a bit more of a brighter year. Whereas on the opposite side, Carolina's taken a nice step forward as well. Bryce Young continues to play pretty well. It wasn't a particularly great game for Bryce Young, but I thought he looked pretty good out there. Didn't make any stupid plays, made a lot of nice throws late in the game, so you know, shout out to Bryce Young. But I think the real hero of the game was Chuba Hubbard, who had 25 carries for 152 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was sort of the big catalyst for the he was sort of the big catalyst for this Panthers offense. Obviously, he won the game for them. So shout out to Chuba Hubbard. The Panthers scored 36 points. So yeah, I mean, that's a really positive sign for this team moving forward. Obviously, they're 4-11, so their season's over with, but you're just trying to find positives from this year, and this is a really good game to look at as a very positive sign of what could come for this Panthers team. Next up, the New York Jets versus the LA Rams, where the LA Rams won a very ugly game that was a little bit low scoring and a little bit too close for comfort, especially because the Rams have been playing so well lately. This was one of those games where I thought the LA Rams could really show some dominance, especially with how the Jets were playing, but the Rams really struggled in this one. They didn't really play well at all. I thought Kyron Williams had a really nice day, but outside of him, Stafford really couldn't get going. But the one thing I will say is they played pretty clean football, only 1 interception on the day, whereas the Jets had 2 fumbles lost, and the penalties, the Jets kind of shot themselves in the foot over and over again. They had 8 penalties on the day, whereas the Rams only had 5. The other thing is that, you know, the Jets were 2 of 5 on 4th down and 5 for 13 on 3rd down. Those are just really bad, inefficient numbers, and that's kind of the whole story here. The Jets offense could move the ball somewhat effectively. They even got into some scoring positions here and there, but 4th down or 3rd down or missing a field goal, it just felt like this team could not convert, which has kind of been a theme for this team the entire year. This team just cannot win the margins, whereas the opposing team typically can. So what are the margins? Well, like I said, penalties. field goals, turnovers, time of possession, stuff like that, third and fourth down efficiency. Those are things that the Jets have got to win, and they haven't won them the majority of the season. This one kind of follows suit because this was a very winnable game for the Jets, a game in which I thought the Jets actually kind of outplayed the LA Rams in a lot of respects, but again, the margins just continue to bite this team, and yeah, they lost the game. Am I panicking about the LA Rams? No, because this is a respectable Jets team. I mean, like I said, the Jets have good players. It's just the simple fact that they can't win the margin. So for the LA Rams to get the win, that's really all that matters. At this point, is just survive and advance. They're now, I believe, the leaders of their division. So that's got to be a nice feeling for that team. Moving on to yet again another, I don't want to say shocker, but a little bit of a shocker here. The Washington Commanders beat the Philadelphia Eagles 36-33. We'll start off with the Philadelphia side of things because I'm actually still kind of impressed with Philadelphia. They scored 33 points, and sure, 21 of them was basically Saquon Barkley making crazy plays in the first half. But, you know, they still scored 33 with Kenny Pickett playing 3 quarters. So I'm definitely not worried about Philadelphia. I thought their defense played pretty good, but it kind of just fell apart in the fourth quarter. And I think a big reason why is they just didn't have Jalen Hurts nor the offense to just kind of run out the clock like they've been doing the past few weeks. So I'm not too worried about Philadelphia. Sure, you would have liked to have gotten the win to pull away the division, but again, I'm not too worried about them. The one thing that I will say is Saquon Barkley is a effing monster, and hopefully Jalen Hurts can come back next week. Also, Devontae Smith, please catch the ball next time. Whereas for Washington, man, you were down big time in the fourth quarter. You just had not a lot of things going your way throughout the game. I mean, 21-7 outside of the first quarter, and Saquon Barkley has like 100 freaking yards in the first quarter. I mean, that's tough stuff. And, you know, they just kept fighting. They just kept scrapping. And Jaden Daniels had himself maybe his best game of the season. He did have 2 interceptions, but 258 yards, 5 passing touchdowns, 9 carries for 81 yards. It does not get much better than that. Again, you'd like to clean up the 2 interceptions, but, you know, I thought Jaden Daniels had a really nice game, man, especially given how good that Eagles defense has been all year long. Again, does this make me worried about the Eagles? No. Maybe it makes me pause a little bit about saying the Eagles have the best defense, but I think when it comes down to it, that Eagles defense can carry this Eagles team to at least an NFC Championship game, though I will say going up against offenses like Green Bay, Minnesota, and Detroit does give me a little bit of pause, but this was a fun game. I thought Washington had a really good fourth quarter that ultimately got them the win here. Bit of a stunner for Philadelphia because they had a lot of opportunities to win the game. They just didn't do so. So, yeah, take that as you will. Saquon Barkley, you're a freaking beast, though. Then we move on to the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Cleveland Browns. Again, as I mentioned with a couple of these games already, not a bunch to take away from this one, especially from the Browns side of things. When the Browns announced that Dorian Thompson-Robinson was going to start this game, that kind of tells you everything you need to know. This team is clearly tanking, and who knows, maybe this team, I'm not sure the exact draft rankings right now, but they might be in a position to draft Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders right now, which I didn't think they were going to be in that conversation, but with Dorian Thompson-Robinson starting and with the Raiders winning, who knows? The Browns scored 6 points. I will say I thought the defense played okay in this one. You held the Bengals to 24-17 through 3 quarters, so you can't be too mad about it. But yeah, Robinson was not going to win you the game. Whereas for the Bengals, it could have been a more clean game offensively. I thought they had a lot of opportunities to open the game up, especially in the second and third quarter, but they just couldn't really do it. They kind of stagnated at like 17 points for a big chunk of the game until eventually they put the 24 up late in the fourth quarter. But, you know, it was one of those games that you just had to get through. You knew you were going to win as long as you just didn't throw a bunch of picks and have a bunch of turnovers and just play absolutely terrible. I will say the Browns actually had a couple nice drives that just kind of ended catastrophically. So yeah, take that as you will, but you know, Cincinnati actually has a legit chance to make the playoffs. They do need a lot of things to go their way, but I'm not sure the exact breakdown, but I saw it earlier and it's somewhat realistic. So we'll just kind of have to keep an eye out on that one. Then we had the Tennessee Titans versus the Indianapolis Colts. Now I did predict Tennessee to win this one because, to be honest with you, I thought Mason Rudolph was going to outplay Anthony Richardson, and boy, I was wrong. Mason Rudolph was really, really rough in this game, especially early on. Now the final score was 38-30 because late in the fourth quarter, the Tennessee Titans put together a couple of drives to make the score look a little bit more respectable. But at the end of the day, Indianapolis had 24 points in the second quarter, which is crazy, and 14 in the third. So those 2 quarters kind of killed the Tennessee Titans. Again, maybe a little bit too close for comfort in that couple of last minutes of the fourth quarter, but eventually they were able to kind of end the game. The big story of this one was Mason Rudolph was god-awful in the first half, and Jonathan Taylor had himself I want to say career day, but I'm not 100% sure. here. 218 yards and 3 touchdowns and multiple rushes that really opened the game up for the Indianapolis Colts. This was a fun one, man. It was just really fun and kind of nice to see Jonathan Taylor get back to a flow. This year hasn't necessarily been the greatest years for Jonathan Taylor. Obviously, we all respect him as a running back and know how good he is, but it hasn't really been his year because of how defenses have been covering this Indianapolis Colts offense. I thought Anthony also had himself a nice day. He did have an interception, which was, I want to say, pretty ugly, but outside of that, I thought he played pretty clean. Again, they're not really throwing the ball that much, so they're kind of realizing the limitations of him, but they are trying to put him in the best positions. I believe they still have a chance to make the playoffs, but it's pretty slim. But this was a good win for them. And again, 38-30, even though it wasn't that close, I thought it was a good win for the Colts. Then we begin our 3 o'clock window, beginning with the Minnesota Vikings versus the Seattle Seahawks. This was a really close game between two teams that are very good. The Seahawks are 8-7, but they were starting to play some really good ball as of late. Geno Smith in this one I thought was pretty good, but he did have 2 interceptions, one of them late, that ultimately sealed the game for the Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota just had a really solid game throughout most of the game, kind of similar to the Cincinnati Bengals, where I talked about how the Bengals couldn't put away their opponent. I kind of feel the same way about Minnesota. At times, Minnesota really had a lot of things going for them, but it just felt like when they had an opportunity to take a double-digit lead or take a really big advantage in this game, they couldn't quite execute at a high enough level. Again, a couple of things can happen there. Penalty, a drop pass here and there, some sacks, stuff like that can happen. So, understand that. But it would have been nice if they could have, executed at a higher level in those points, in those moments of the game, to pull away and eventually put a nice score up on the board. But that wasn't the case in this game. Outside of that, I thought Sam Darnold played pretty well. 3 touchdowns and no interceptions. The ground game, it's okay on this one. Aaron Jones had 67 rushing yards. Justin Jefferson had 10 catches for 144 yards and 2 touchdowns. It does not matter who the quarterback is. Justin Jefferson is going to put up numbers. Sam Darnold is having a great year, and a massive reason why is having Justin Jefferson as a security gate at all times. For Minnesota, they're 13-2. I'm not quite yet sold on this team being a true contender because of just how many close games they've been in. I will say those close games, they have, for the most part, been in control of those games, but you would like to see this team, pull out a nice blowout here and there. I do think that Minnesota Vikings team, though, could really put a number on what is currently a banged-up Lions team and even an Eagles team. I do think the Vikings could give them a serious run for their money, so I do think they are potential contenders. We'll just keep it at that for now. Whereas for Seattle, this is a really frustrating loss. Obviously, if you won this game, you're, I think, either in the lead or tied for the division, but you didn't win this game. You're now behind the LA Rams. No rushing game in this one. DK Metcalf had a couple nice plays, but also had a couple ugly ones. Jackson Smith and Jigba continues to have a good season, but yeah, frustrating loss for the Seattle Seahawks, but it's okay. You get another year with Mike McDonald next year to kind of hopefully put some things together and figure out the defense a bit more, because I do think the Seahawks team would really benefit from having a dominant defense, which they just don't have right now. And then moving to the Buffalo Bills versus the New England Patriots. Now, the Patriots at one point were kind of dominating the game early on, and then the Bills kind of just locked back in for a few moments and eventually did take the lead. Buffalo would go on to hold for the rest of the game, in part because of some Drake May mistakes, mainly the backwards pass that led to a touchdown for Buffalo. That's one of those plays where you're a rookie, you just have to know not to throw the ball behind you, as well as if you're the running back, execute at a higher level. For New England, losing this type of game isn't bad. I did say coming into this one that I thought it was going to be a relatively close game, just because New England is one of those teams that can sort of be a bit of a boogeyman. They can kind of make things interesting versus really good teams for kind of no reason, and that's kind of what happened in this one. Again, Drake May continues to look really good. He makes a couple mistakes here and there, but he does bounce back typically pretty nice from it. I also thought Ramondre Stevenson also had himself a pretty nice day. For the Buffalo Bills, obviously you would have liked to have put away the Patriots a lot earlier in the game. The final score was 24-21. Obviously, the Patriots scored a late touchdown to make it a bit more closer, but the real score was like 24-14 with like 5 minutes to go or something like that. So some late garbage points would make this game a tad bit closer. Again, For Buffalo, you would have liked to have maybe put up like 30 something points to make this game a lot more, of a blowout in that sense. But you also do have to understand that not every single game is going to be a blowout. Sometimes you are going to have to go out there and have a bit of a dogfight versus a bad team. And that's kind of what happened in this one. Josh Allen didn't have himself the greatest day. He had one turnover that was really ugly. I will say the one concerning thing is I think there's something wrong with his right hand, which we will definitely be tracking moving forward, because that could be a big deal come playoff time, because this Bills team wants to try and win a Super Bowl, and if their quarterback is banged up, that's really concerning. The good news for the Buffalo Bills is you're probably not going to get first place in the division or first place in the conference. You're definitely going to win the division. There's not a whole lot of things in your way, so if worst case scenario, they potentially could rest their starters in the last week of the season and give Josh Allen more time to heal. You also could just rely on James Cook a lot more, because James Cook is also pretty good, so take that as you will. But yeah, I mean, good win here for the Buffalo Bills. You just added to your record. Not a lot to take away from this game outside of that Josh Allen injury. Then we move on to what I like to call as the nobody wants to win game between the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Las Vegas Raiders. Coming into this game, I believe that the Raiders had the #1 overall pick. Now, after this game, I actually think they dropped to like the 5th or 4th overall pick, which just tells you how many bad teams there are out there. For the Jacksonville Jaguars side of things, though, because you lost, you're now still in the conversation to potentially get Travis Hunter, so that's the good news. But for the Raiders, this is a really this is a brutal loss. I feel like both these two teams really wanted to lose to get their franchise either receiver or quarterback, but with the Raiders winning this game, it really does open up the draft board, and I'm definitely going to have to do an updated mock draft, because Raiders are now in a situation where I don't know who they're going to take in the first round if it isn't a quarterback, because with the way the board is shaping up, if the Raiders can't take Shador or Cam Ward, are they going to reach on a quarterback, or are they just going to go best player available at that point? And if that is the case, and if Cam Ward and Shador Sanders do pan out to be really good players, we're going to be looking back at this game as one of those moments in time that costed the Raiders a really good chance to get a really good player. It wasn't even like the Raiders played that good. They didn't run the ball that well. They had a couple nasty plays here and there. Aiden O'Connell, though, had a better day than what we seen a couple weeks ago, and Brock Bowers continues his dominant season. Whereas on the other side, statistically speaking, the Jaguars had himself a nice day. It was just a couple mistakes here and there that ultimately costed them. 2 fumbles lost, 8 penalties, a bunch of punts, 6 of 15 on third down. Those sort of things are going to lose you games. But, the Raiders side of the thing wasn't that pretty either. 4 for 14 on third down, 6 punts, 7 penalties, and them no turnovers. But yeah, I mean, both these two teams probably wanted to lose, and it's going to be interesting to see some mock drafts moving forward, because the Raiders are in a really big predicament. They're more than likely going to have to trade up at this point, because you got to get a quarterback. And then moving on to the Miami Dolphins versus the San Francisco 49ers. The Niners continue to just look bad and worse and worse and worse. Now, I will say in this one, no Christian McCaffrey, so the ground game was just really bad all day. Brock Purdy ended up being the leading rusher for this team. I thought Brock made some nice plays here and there, but I just felt like the execution of this team was really poor all day long. Again, kind of a theme here about the margins. The Niners had 11 penalties for 90 yards, 3 sacks allowed, 5 for 13 on third down, an interception, and 4 punts. So just a really bad formula to win games. Again, I thought Brock Purdy made some nice plays here and there, but the execution wasn't there. Whereas for the Miami Dolphins side of things, it wasn't pretty, but they got the job done. There was also a couple opportunities for Tyreek Hill to make some catches that didn't go their way, but for the most part, I thought Miami actually looked pretty good out there, especially against a Niners defense that is somewhat respectable. Tua Tagovailoa was 22 for 34 for 215, but Devon Achane was kind of the star with 17 carries for 120 yards, not to mention 6 catches for 70 yards as well. So Jane had a nice day, and yeah, they pulled out a win versus a San Francisco team that isn't really good. So no, you can't count this as a over 500 team win for Mike McDaniel, but it's a good win versus a somewhat quality opponent. So congratulations to the Dolphins, but both these two teams are basically out of playoff contention at that point. I do believe Miami could get in, but it's, I think, unlikely at this point. Now, real quick, before we actually hop into the last game we're going to talk about in this video, which is the Cowboys versus the Buccaneers, if you guys want to know my opinion of the Monday Night Football game between the New Orleans Saints and the Green Bay Packers, I will be having a post on my community tab talking about the game, as well as asking you guys a question. So if you guys are interested in my perspective of this game, just check it out later today. But let's talk about the Cowboys versus the Buccaneers. This was maybe my most entertaining game of the season. Now, to give a bit of context, I do like the Cowboys a lot, as well as I am a pretty big Buccaneers fan, so I was pretty invested in this game. I did think the Buccaneers were going to come into Dallas and win, but gotta give credit to Dallas, man. They played their hearts out on this one. Jordan Lewis is a freaking dog. Donovan Wilson made a couple nice plays here and there. It was a game where the rushing attack wasn't there for Dallas. Rico Della only had 23 carries, but with no rushing attack, you put the ball in Cooper Rush's hand, and, you know, Cooper Rush kind of cooked out there. On the day, Cooper Rush was 26 for 35 for 292 yards and 1 touchdown. CeeDee Lamb, who had a massive shoulder injury throughout the week and has been struggling with it basically all year, had 7 catches on the day as well. Whereas for the Buccaneers side of things, Baker Mayfield played pretty well. I will say the offensive line really struggled today versus that Dallas Cowboys pass rush, mainly Micah Parsons. Bucky Irving, when he was getting opportunities, had a couple nice runs here and there. Not a whole lot of Rachaad White in this one, only 3 rushes, but we all know how the game ended. He did have a fumble to lose the game eventually. Mike Evans also had a pretty nice day. For me, what was the difference in this game was just the turnovers. The Buccaneers had 2 turnovers, whereas the Dallas Cowboys had 0. Cowboys didn't necessarily have the greatest day. They were 5 of 15 on 3rd downs, 5 punts, and just not playing the greatest football, but they made enough plays here and there. And again, the defense just played some really good football. It was a physical and fun game, and man, this Cowboys team, I know this is going to be an unpopular take, but if the Cowboys don't get Ben Johnson or Mike Vrabel or Liam Cohen, I'm kind of in favor of this team bringing back Mike McCarthy for 1 more year, just to let him have one last run with a hopefully healthy Dallas Cowboys team, because the way that team was fighting with CeeDee Lamb injured, with Micah Parsons dealing with all these injuries, with the way the secondary was hitting, with the way that the team just looked like it cared, this was a Cowboys team that it was really fun to watch, and it just kind of makes me a little bit upset that we didn't see this Cowboys team week 1 or week 2 when this team had a lot of its healthy pieces. I think a aggressive Cowboys offseason and a good draft, and maybe the Dallas Cowboys could be something next year. We'll just have to obviously wait and see what they decide to do. But for the Cowboys, I was pretty inspired by their performance. Whereas for the Buccaneers side of things, this is a really bad loss. The Dallas Cowboys just aren't a great team right now, though they're playing better football. So this game was always going to be competitive. But man, the Buccaneers had a chance to basically put away the division, and they did not do so. Now the door is wide open for a team like Atlanta to pop in there and potentially win the division, which is really unfortunate because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were playing some really good football. I actually had them in my top 10 coming into this week. Obviously, the Buccaneers are going to have to regroup next week and potentially try to find a way to win the division here soon, but that's going to be kind of to be determined. Now, real quick before we end the video, I did just want to briefly show off my predictions because I know you guys like to see that. As you can see, not my greatest week in the world, but I've had some pretty good weeks. You can see my record up top right there, so hopefully you guys enjoyed. And if you enjoyed, hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.